Okay, so module 15 is the application layer, and application layer is on the OSI model is the last layer, and then for the TCP/IP, it's actually the presentation. Sorry, for the TCP/IP, you have both the application, presentation, and section of the OSI matching side by side with the TCP/IP model. So the objective is to explain the functions of the application layer, looking at the presentation layer and section layer, how they work together to provide network services to end user applications. And then we'll look at peer-to-peer, explain how end user application operates in peer-to-peer network. We'll also look at web and email protocol, and then IP addressing services, and then file sharing services. So looking at the application and the presentation. So under the application layer, the best way to explain this is you bring out the OSI model side by side with TCP/IP model. And once you do that, it goes a long way to help to demonstrate the behavior of the application layer. So the upper layers of the OSI model is the application, presentation, and section. Define the function of the TCP/IP application layer. The application layer provides the interface between the application used to communicate and the underlying network over which messages are transmitted. So you can see here that the application layer actually provide the interface between the other application that is used. So when, for instance, your Facebook page, you agree between sit at the application layer. So some of the most widely known application layer protocols include HTTP, your FTP, your TFTP, IMAP, and DNS. These are examples of the application layer. And then looking at the application layer from the perspective of the TCP/IP model, you can see the domain name system, the hypertext transfer protocol, simple mail transfer protocol, post office protocol, dynamic host configuration protocol. Now, all these actually fall under the application layer, looking at it from the TCP/IP. But also note here that beneath the application layer is the presentation layer. And that is where you have it in file format. So your file format, which could be in JPEG, in doc, could be in text, could be in PNG, all those formats actually fall within presentation layer. And then it's actually a process where you have the encoding and the decoding process is also taking place. And then for the section layer, you agree with me, it has to maintain what we call dialog control and end-to-end communication. So it keeps those links active. So further explanation is also given here that the presentation layer has three primary functions: formatting or presenting data at the source, and then device into compatible format for receipt by the destination device. It also compresses data in a way that can be decompressed by the destination device, and then encrypting data for transmission and decrypting data upon receipt. So that is the role of the presentation layer. In the section layer, it's to create and maintain dialog control, like I said, or dialogue between source and destination applications. For instance, if you open any of the website, you quite agree with me that even though you have like 4 or 5 windows all open, there's that communication going on between all the windows. So what keeps it active at every point in time? Probably you send a message to somebody and the person hasn't responded, but you're quite sure that as long as you're on the internet, once the person responds, you'll get some kind of messages that shows that on that particular window, a message has been resent. So, but what keeps the activity going between your own end and then the server end or the destination end of that person's system? For instance, you and I are actually talking and communicating on this medium. The question is that what keeps my window active with yours? It's with the help of the section layer. So it creates and maintains dialogue between source and destination application. It handles the exchange of information to initiate dialogues, keep them active, and to restart sections that are disrupted or idle for a long period of time. So it's quite important. And so the TCP/IP application protocol specifies the format and then control the information necessary for many common internet communication functions. Application layer protocols are used by both source and destination devices during communication section. And then for the communication to be successful, the application layer protocols are implemented on the source and destination host must be what? Compatible. So what is peer-to-peer? We're going to talk about peer-to-peer network or to peer-to-peer connection. Under the peer-to-peer, we have client to server. There are cases where somebody will say, oh, your network is peer-to-peer. In a way, they tend to tell you that they have a direct connection to your router, your LAN router, or they have direct connection to your LAN switch. And so if you configure your network such that the cable that is dropping from the ISP goes straight to your LAN router, obviously is not a secure way of protecting an enterprise network, because such kind of connection, we also sometimes describe it as peer-to-peer, because the ISP can actually have access to the entire LAN network. So there's a need oftentimes for you to have something like a DMZ switch, which is like the first point of connection, which of course in the DMZ is actually what we call the demilitarized zone. And that is where you create the initial firewall protection for the network before you connect it to the router. There you can actually implement one or two security policies. And that helps a lot. It goes a long way to help to mitigate certain attack. And if any ISP, for instance, would want to have access to your network, he or she will definitely seek for the IP address of your router. But if it's connected directly, oftentimes they don't even seek for a permission, because they can see directly from their own domain. So such kind of configuration is still under the peer-to-peer. So for peer-to-peer also, we could say client-server model. So a client and server processes are considered to be in the application layer. In the client-server model, the device requesting the information is called a client, and the device responding to the request is called a server. So when you have an application on a particular system, and you have a system that must connect to that server, just for instance, maybe if you have a CBT center where your students go to write CBT exams, you quite agree with me that those systems are actually client to server, in the sense that your exam questions are uploaded on the server and the student have to write from each client system. So that's more or less the client to server kind of application we're talking about, because the main repository or the main application is actually domiciled in the server. So they can now initiate requests from their respective systems. So in a peer-to-peer network, two or more computers are connected by network and can share resources. So such as printers and files, without having a dedicated server. So every connected end device known as peer-to-peer can function as both a server and a client. So none of them have a particular administrative role here. Anyone can assume to be the server at every point in time. So, and then we have one computer might assume to be the role of a server for one transmission while simultaneously. So please note this, that we have under this peer-to-peer, we have the one that is client to server, which I just explained, and then we have the one that is peer-to-peer network. So that means for the peer-to-peer, any of the system can actually play the role of the administrative role or have the content that is required by the other. But from the former one, we have one that is the server having a main application, while the other is the client, which I pointed to be like a CBT exam, where you have a server that have the question bank and then you have a system the other side of the divide that have to initiate requests to the main server. But in this case of peer-to-peer network, it will be you having a direct connection through your router or your switch and to the printer. So this is like a direct connection here. And then peer-to-peer applications. So a peer-to-peer application allows a device to act as both a client and a server without the same communication. That is for peer-to-peer applications. So some peer-to-peer applications use a hybrid system where each peer accesses an index server to get the location of the resources stored on other peers. So you can see that for application also for peer-to-peer connection can also be in such a way that each peer accesses an index server to get the location or their location is of a source and stored on another peer on the same connection. I think Torrent is one of them, one of those applications that does the same thing. So we have a number of them here. We have the BitTorrent, we have the Direct Connect, we have the eDonkey and the FreeNet. These are common peer-to-peer networks applications. So you can actually try this out and see how it works. So we look at the web and protocol, web and email protocol. Under this, you see that for the web, for you to talk about web and email, you must talk about the hypertext transfer protocol and the hypertext markup language. This actually uses to address the web operations generally. So when a web address or a uniform resource locator is typed into a web browser, the web browser establishes connection to the web service. So the web service is running on the server that is using the HTTP protocol. That you can agree with me. Remember, the uniform resource locator is that browser where you will launch your browser, that link or that space in which you type the website name or whichever domain, you tag the URL, which is the uniform resource locator, and then the web service must run on that server. So that actually provide that protocol that enable you have access to that application. So to better understand how the web browser and the web server interact, examine a web page is open in the browser. So look at a step-by-step guide here. One, the browser interprets the three parts of the URL, which is the HTTP. And then what does it do? It looks at it from the angle of the domain, which is the server name, and then the index.html, which is a specific file name that must be in that folder. So usually, for those of you who actually do some web development, you agree with me that anytime you're trying to make some changes on the link, maybe the IP address, you always go rush down to the index.html. That is where you really have the main domain information. So the hypertext transfer protocol and the hypertext markup language still look at step 2. The browser then checks with the name and server to convert the www.cisco.com as an example of a domain into a numeric IP address, which is used to connect to the server. Remember that this www.cisco.com has an IP address as the main function. That is what is used to connect to the server. And the client initiates an HTTP request to a server by sending a GET request to the server and asks for the index.html file. And then in step 3, in response to the request, the server sends the HTML code for this web page to the browser itself. And once these 3 steps are established, that is when you have a full access or control, and then you see the page loads completely. So finally, the browser identifies the HTML code and format the page for the browser window. Then here we look at the HTTP and HTTPS. What differences do we have? The HTTP is a request to correspond protocol that specifies the message type used for the communication. The 3 common message types are GET, posts and puts. And what are they? The get is a client request for data. A client, which is a web browser, send the get message to the web server to request for the HTML pages. And for the post is when this is upload data files to the web server, such as form data. And then the put is when it uploads the resources or content to the web server, such as an image or some kind, such an image or graphics to start loading. Is referred to as the put. HTTP is not secured, that which we know already, and HTTPS should be better off used than HTTP. And so you're looking at HTTP as port 80, while HTTPS as port 443. Okay, so here the email protocols. Email is stored and forward method of sending and storing, retrieving electronic message across the network. We know that already. The email messages are stored in database or mail servers. Email clients communicate with the mail servers to send and receive email. I think most of us who use email actually will know that these are the possibilities for the operations of the email. So you already have an email server, so that is where you have a database of all the information that you have to, when someone receive a mail, it goes to that particular database.
Sorry, Dr. Daniel.
Yes.
If you don't mind, can I take you back 2 slides, please?
Okay.
Post and put.
Okay.
Post and put. You know, these 3 get. This is a client, the client is requesting from the server.
Yeah,
the post. So where is the response of the server?
No, that's why we had for the, you see, for the post, this upload data files to the web server. Are you saying
from where? Yes.
Yes, what I'm saying is that the get is the client request. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
And sends the get message to the web server, right? So you request the HTML pages. So what the post now upload that data files to the web server.
Okay.
Are you following?
Yes, sir.
And then the put now is that this upload resources or content of the web server, such as the image. So the question now here is that it is the post that now upload data to the web server. You already have a web server, which is like, what you're saying is like more or less when you have client and server side.
Yes.
So here is that when the file is on the web server itself, that's on the server end. We're now saying that the upload resources, or which is already on the web server, example of it is the image. So you're now looking at the different type of the files. You know, these files have different types.
Yes, sir.
Good. So here for the put is this upload the resources or content to the web server, such as an image. That means what uploads the resources and the content to the web server is the put. But then the file itself that is coming to the web server is the post.
Okay. Okay.
The get is
better from the client.
Exactly. And then the post
is
on the server.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we didn't see you from the beginning, Sir Julius. I was wondering.
When I didn't come in early, sir.
Okay. I said, where it's like maybe today you slept off. I forgot that way.
Join when you just started. When you just started. But I didn't talk. I said I joined just as you were about starting.
Okay. Okay. So that's nice. So the SMTP, POP, and the IMAP. The SMTP, which is the simple mean transfer protocol, operates with 25. So when a client sends an email, the client SMTP process connect with the server, right? On port 25, isn't it? And after the connection is made, the client attempts to send the email to the server across the connection. Now, when the server receives the message, you know, it's like a delivery agent now. when server receives the message, it either places the message in a local account if the recipient is local, or forward the message to another mail server for delivery. And a destination email server may not be online or may be busy, for instance. So if so, the SMTP pull messages to be sent at a later time. So you can see from this diagram here, you can see the SMTP from the system to the server. Yeah. And you can also see that if it's going to, if it's being delivered, it's delivered at the POP, which is more or less like the, what do you call it now? If it's sending the SMTP, and at the point of what delivery is going to what? The POP. The POP is actually on port 110. POP3 is on port 110, right?
Yes.
Okay, so in this case now, you could say the SMT is sending to, that's the SMTP, and then that's why you can see the POP also, because it can also be vice versa. And then if you're sending it to the POP, from the POP, you can also go back to the SMP and then back to the system. So the system is like sending while the server is receiving. Are we together? And then from the recipient here also at this destination can also what possibly send as well. But here we're saying that the delivery point of it is from the POP to the recipient. But then when it's sending by the SMTP at port 25. And that's why we said here that when the server receives the message, it either places the message in a local account, or if the recipient is local, or forward the message to another mail server for delivery. So the destination email server may not be online or may be busy. So if so, SMTP pulls messages to be sent at a later time. Let me see, I think there's more information here. So the POP is used by the application to retrieve the mail. Can we see that? From a mail server. So when a mail is downloaded from the server to the client using what? The POP, the messages are then deleted on the server. So the server starts the POP services by passively listening to on TCP port, what? 110 for client connection. So what we're saying here is that when you're sending through the port 25 at the SMTP, being received by the server, and then from the server also, of course, if there are two servers linked like what we have here, it's also sent again through the SMTP. But we're saying at the point of delivery to the recipient is on port 110, which is POP3. Now look at the third item here. When the connection is established, the POP server sends a greeting. The client and the POP server then exchange command and responses until the connection is closed or aborted. Note, POP does not store messages. It is not recommended for small businesses that need a centralized backup solution. So we're looking at web and email protocols. We're looking at how from the client side, you can send through the server to the recipient. But what I just want to make us understand here is that note that on the SMTP, you're sending on port 25, and then the POP, you actually, it's where it is being delivered, like a delivery agent to the system. When you're doing your assessment, you might come across possibly some questions, and they will give you options. In other words, they will give you this agent, and they will give you, and they just give you some kind of a kind of an arrow to show how messages are sent from one system to the recipient. So you need to actually take your time to look at this connection. Of course, it's possible you might get questions from that angle, you possibly might not get. So it all depends, but there's still need for us to understand this. Then for the IMAP is another protocol that describes a method to retrieve email messages. So unlike POP, when a user connects to IMAP server, copies of the messages are downloaded to the client application. The original messages are kept on the server until manually were deleted. That means you get an instance of the message, but the original message is still on the server. That's the case of the IMAP. And when a user decides to delete a message, the server synchronizes that action and deletes the message from the server. But at first, it drops an instance of the message on the client side and keep the original on the main server until when manually deleted. But when a user decides to delete a message, the server synchronizes, and then that action deletes the message even right from the server. So IP addressing services, we have the domain name were created to convert the numeric IP addresses into a simple, recognizable name. You agree with me that the DNS actually help you to resolve the name. So it means that originally what you have is an IP address. I usually advise big organizations and even institutions that it would be nice they actually set up their own DNS on their network, because it makes the network faster. On the ground that if you use CentOS, if you install the CentOS on the server, let's assume you have a server on your NOC, in the course of installing CentOS, it also gives you the opportunity to create your own DNS. So you can use one of the public IP addresses you have to form your own domain name service instead of going to use in fact, if you look at most of these networks, you see everybody using Google 8.8.8 or 4.4.4 as the domain IP address. But if you create your own using your own block of IP, the network becomes faster. So I advise you to do that. It helps to resolve the name faster for you. So fully qualified domain name, such as Cisco.com, are much easier for people to remember than the IP address. So this is like an IP address for Cisco. So if you type 19A1.133.219.25, it's expected that you have the Cisco.com. So which will you prefer? Will you prefer Cisco.com or you prefer this IP address? And of course, it's obvious that most of us will not remember this IP address, but we always remember Cisco.com. And that's the essence of the domain name service. So the domain name service protocol defines an automated services that matches resources name with a required numeric network address. It includes the format for queries and responses and data. I hope you all agree with me that these numbers here you have in decimals ought to be in numeric. Of course, you can still convert them to bits of zeros and ones. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yes. Okay, thank you very much. So the domain name service message format. So domain names, the DNS server stores different types of resources, resource records that are used to resolve names. These records contain the name, address, and type of record. So some of these record types are as follows. Your an end device IPv4 address, and when it's NS, it's an authoritative name server. And then when it's an end device for IPv6 address. And when it's MX, a mail exchange record. So these are record types that are like DNS message format. So when a client makes a query, the server DNS processes first look at its own record to resolve the name, to tell if it's an end device or an authoritative name server, and then be able to match it up. So what we're saying here, it look at this record to resolve the name. If it's unable to resolve the name by using its stored record, which look at some of them here, it contacts other servers to resolve the name. That means there are other servers within those the DNS. And after a match is found and returned to the original requesting server, the server temporarily will store the numeric addresses in the event that the same name is requested again. So you can see it keeps adding up this to build its own database to be able to resolve this name. So for IPv4, you can see what it is, and then for authoritative name server, it's NS, and then for an end device, these are just the different ways in which the DNS uses to address all the activities, or more or less sites you visit based on their domain. So you can see for an end device that is having an IPv6, it has to say it from the AA point of view, its record. So these are just record types that you have to match with each of these behavior for an IPv4, for IPv6, and for a mail exchange record. Okay, and like we said, if it doesn't find it in its own service, it will also use other DNS to resolve that. And that is why if you have your own DNS, you can as well link your DNS to, but it's natural, it will resolve it with other DNS available service as long as it's on the public domain. That will not happen if it's on the internet. It will only happen when you're on the public domain. So the DNS message format, so the DNS uses the same message format between servers. Okay, it uses the same between servers consisting of questions, answers, authority, and additional information for all types of client queries and server responses, error messages, and transfer resources record. So for DNS message section like question, the description is the question for the name server, and then for answer, resources record answering the question. And if it's for authority, it means the resource record pointing toward the authority. And then additional is actually resource record holding additional information. So these are the different DNS message section. Then for DNS hierarchy, of course, we still recall, the DNS uses hierarchy systems to create a database to provide name resolution. Like you can see here from this root level domain, we have a .NET. Some of you could recall you have domain name service have .NET, you have .edu for education, .com, you have .au, .co. So when a DNS server receives a request for a name translation that is not within its DNS zone, the DNS server forwards the request to other DNS servers that we have mentioned before within the proper zone for what translation. So example of top level domains. So these are what we refer to as the top level domains is .com. So .com is for business or industry. .org is for maybe non-profit organizations. And then .au is for Australia. So I think we are conversant with this, of course. So it's high time you also, if you don't, you also look at it also. If you're looking at .com, you're looking at the businesses or industry or .org. The people these days just choose anyone, and use. But then it's right, you know what each of them stands for. Just like for the edu, you know, it's like you say Baze University at edu.com. That shows actually is on education. So the NSLOOKUP command, NSLOOKUP is the computer operating system utility that allows a user to manually query the DNS service configured on the device to resolve a given host name. So you can use the NSLOOKUP to actually carry out the query. Like from here, you can see it even from the system. If you type NSLOOKUP, it will display it because all you're trying to do is to query and ask if what you have as the IP address, what is the name? You know, so it brings out the numeric address and also gives you the name because you have actually carried out a query. So the utility can also be used to troubleshoot name resolution issues and to verify the current status of the name service. So when the NSLOOKUP command is issued, the default DNS server configured for your host is displayed. So the name of a host or domain name can be entered at the NSLOOKUP prompt. So for me, there's not too much grammar with this. All you just need to do is on your system, you just type NSLOOKUP and be able to see the information that will be displayed. So you see the IP address, you see the name, the domain name for that IP address, and the server, and it gives you full information to guide you on the DNS. So it's one command that every network engineer should be able to remember. And then the dynamic host configuration protocol. That's the DHCP. So the DHCP for IPv4 service automates the assignment for IPv4. In other words, makes it dynamical. So DHCP is considered dynamic addressing compared to static. Of course, when you do static, it's manual. When you do DHCP, it's manual. For instance, when you configure a DHCP for a pool of IP address for /24, for instance, which is 254, when you do that on the router, what you're saying is that all the systems will automatically pick IP addresses without you going to each of them to assign an IP address. So in our project, we're actually going to configure a DHCP on our router. So please, you look forward to that. So at the end of this class, we'll all agree how we're going to go about it. So I think I will leave that part for the lab or for the project, and hopefully we do that together. So for file transfer protocol, FTP, I think we've talked about FTP before, but here we'll just look at the steps. For the FTP, one, the client establishes the first connection to the server for controlled traffic using TCP port 21. We already know it's port 21, and the traffic consists of the client commands and server replies. So in step 2, the client establishes the second connection to the server for the actual data transfer using TCP port 20. So you can see that's why we say port 20 and 21 is for the FTP. So this connection is created every time there's data to be transferred, because there's a back and forth transfer of data. So the data transfer can happen in either direction. The client can download as to pull data from the server, or the client can upload or push data back to the server. That is why the 2 port numbers have to come into use. And then for the server message block, is a client server request response file sharing protocol, which servers can make their own resources available to clients on the network. The 3 function of the server message block is that it starts and authenticates the terminates the section. So what here is that for the server message block, is a way of telling you that the server can make its content or resources available to client directly from the network. So in other words, making instances of those resources available. So the control file and printer access this same content, allow an application to send or receive messages from another device. Unlike file sharing supported by FTP, client establish a long-term connection to servers. After the connection is established, the user of the client can access the resources on the server as though the resources is local to the client host. So in this case, like I said, it's making the resources available on the network for you to be able to access. Now, once you take your time with this explanation, what you need to do is to go back to the material, read through the learning material all over again, and then attempt the quizzes first before you go to the main module exam. I think for 15, I think, okay, 15, 16, and 17 goes together. So it's when you finish 15, then you go to 16. But then one of the best way to test your ability is to first read through and then attempt the quizzes on your own. I don't know, those of you who are doing that, I think you'll find it more interesting, because it's when you now look at those quizzes will give you a guide to let you know how the main module exam will look like. So if your score is not too strong, on your own, you decide to go back again and read the curriculum. But our advice that as you're reading this, you put a lot of emphasis on the lab side too, because the lab can make you be able to explain this better and even faster. So let's also look at network security fundamentals, which is module 16. this part of the security is not core, but just a way to take you through the fundamentals of security. Those of us who would love to go further on cybersecurity, we will look at the CCNA cyber ops, and then you also look at the CCNP cyber ops and all of that. So there's another career trend for those who actually have interest. And I think is it Samuel or Moses who actually I think would love to do that. So I see that after this particular course, you can actually enroll into that and then take that also. For those of us who are also interested, I think the opportunity is also there to do that. So let's look at the objective for network security. At the end of the whole CCNA1, the student should be able to explain basic security measures and necessary measures that are necessary on normal network devices, identify security vulnerabilities, identify general mitigation techniques. In other words, look at some basic techniques on how to mitigate certain attack. Configure network device with device hardening features to mitigate security threat. So security threat and vulnerabilities. Attacks on the network can be devastating and can result in a loss of time. So not just only the attack, but also discover that loss of time and money due to damage or theft and important information. So this is not actually good for network. After the threat, So intruders who gain access by modifying software, exploring software vulnerabilities are called threat actors. So who are threat actors? Threat actors are those intruders that gain access to our network or gain access to our enterprise network and then modify software or exploiting software vulnerabilities. So you're the line that threat actors. So after the threat actor gain access to the network, 4 types of threats may arise. So once they gain access to your network, what might likely happen? They can steal the information. There might be data loss and manipulation of data. Alter this data, identity theft, and then disruption services. So you need to note these 4 types of threat that can be carried out by the threat actors. So types of vulnerabilities, there are 3 primary vulnerabilities or weaknesses. Please, when we say vulnerability is the degree of weakness in a network or a device. So when there's some weakness or loopholes or some kind of free access, or do I say the opportunities for hackers to be able to access your network, we tag that as vulnerability. So any degree or any amount of space made available or for some kind of weakness that is created on the network is called vulnerability. So there are 3 primary vulnerabilities which everybody should look out for. Is technological vulnerabilities might include TCP/IP protocols weakness, operating system weaknesses, and network equipment weaknesses. So it can come from the TCP/IP protocol part, or it might be from the operating system. And maybe some patches that you're needed to update that you haven't updated, can also allow threat actors to have access to it. And then network equipment weaknesses. So if you have network equipment, so this network equipment require you to configure their security aspect of it. And if you don't, then they could have access to it. For instance, you buy a switch by default and you don't configure the basic security apparatus, definitely it can be accessed. So configuration of vulnerabilities might include unsecure user account, system account with easily guessed passwords. So some of these can easily be guessed. Misconfigured internet services, unsecured default settings, and misconfigured network equipment. So these are the vulnerabilities we're talking about. And lastly, security policy vulnerabilities might include lack of a written security policy. So politics, lack of authentication, connectivity, continuity, logical access control not being applied. So you must apply certain security policies, and lack of it also will create vulnerabilities. Like when you get to CCNA2, where you didn't access this control, you also agree with there are certain policies you can also make from that. So all three of these sources of vulnerabilities can leave a network or device open to various attacks, including malicious code attacks and network attacks. So you have to look forward to that. So physical security. So you can see that what we mentioned is not actually that physical, but here we're looking at physical. So for physical security, you see hardware threats. This includes physical damages to servers, routers. Somebody can do direct damages. That is why you see most of these NOC, the NOC, which is the network operating centers of most organizations, they'll tell you out of bounds, because it's, in fact, some of them you can't actually access them directly. There are some other doors that the network administrator uses to enter the room. It's because somebody can just come there and just destroy those equipment. And once it is destroyed, you can imagine what you'll have lost. So environmental threats, this include temperature extremes, too hot or too cold, or humidity extremes, too wet or too dry. Electrical threats, this include voltage spikes, insufficient supply voltage, brownout, and all of that. And somebody will be wondering, how does electrical threats affect, create some security threats? Of course it does. I remember I did my PhD in IoT security, and I'll let you know that in the course of the research, I also discovered that some attackers or hackers actually will just go to a particular part where, they, of course, maybe a power section that is powering your NOC. They will just create unnecessary spike or what we call surge, because spike is like when you create a double of the nominal voltage. And the essence of this is actually it opens the makes the hardware very vulnerable. So the hardware on its own, the security you already have in the hardware automatically opens up, and you can have direct or back-end access to the system. So some hackers actually have been known to be using that opportunity to hack into servers and some of this high-tech equipment that contain very confidential information. So maintenance threat, this includes poor handling of key electrical component, that's electrostatic discharge, lack of critical spare parts, poor cabling, and poor labeling. So a good plan for physical security must be created and implemented to address these issues. So we should look into that and make them know that in the course of building their network or trying to establish an enterprise network that will enable them share resources, all those things have to be looked into. So network attacks. So types of malware. So what is malware? Malware for short is for malicious software. So malicious software are referred to as malware. And the following are the types of different malwares we have. We have viruses, we have worm, we have Trojan horses. Name them, and then so much. And then under network attacks, we have recognizes attack. In addition to malicious code attack, we have recognizes attack. This actually the discovery and mapping of system services or vulnerabilities. And then we also have access attack, the unauthorized manipulation of data, system access or user privilege. And denial of service is disabling or corruption of network systems or services. And so these are actually the reconnaissance attacks, the three types of reconnaissance attacks. And then for reconnaissance attacks, external threat actors can use internet tools such as I learned to now use internet as a noun, so usually it's a capital letter, such as the NS lookup and who is utilities. So to easily determine the IP address space assigned to a given corporation or entity. After the IP address space is determined, a threat actor can then ping the public available IP addresses to identify the address that are active. So you can see the way the attack is being used. First, you do the NS lookup, and you know what NS lookup will do. It will give you the numeric address of the domain, and then resolve the domain name for you, and then let you know who is, and then to easily determine the IP address space assigned to a given operating. After the IP address space is determined, the threat actor then ping to be able to be sure that publicly available IP addresses to identify the address that is active. So you begin to ping to check until it's able to see the particular one that is active. You know, these folks will always take their time to use all the available tools, the same tools you use for your troubleshooting. They also use the same tools to launch their attack. Most of them don't create new tools, but they use existing network tools. So, and that's why we have the ethical hackers, because you now begin to, you that must mitigate against these hackers also have to use the same tools also to monitor them as well. And then for those of us who will go further, you begin to see how you can check the level of damages and then see how to mitigate against this attack. So access attacks. Access attack exploit known vulnerabilities in authentication services, the FTP services, and the web services to gain entry to web accounts, confidential databases, and other sensitive information. So the access attacks can be classified into 4 types. The first one is the password attack, which is implemented using the brute force Trojan horse and packet sniffers. And then the trust exploitation. In this case, it uses a threat actor. The threat actor uses unauthorized privileges to gain access to a system, possibly compromising the target. And then port redirection. So a threat actor can use a compromised system as a base for attacks against other targets. For example, a threat actor using SSH for 20 to connect to a compromised host A. Host A is trusted by host B, for instance, and therefore the threat actor can use telnet port 23 to access it. Can you see that? So for instance, when he has seen that he can use SSH to connect to a compromised host A, but fully aware that host A is trusted by host B, and therefore the threat actor can use telnet to access. So that means once able to access host A, of course, it can telnet into host B, because host A is trusted by host B. So you can see the relationship here. And the man in the middle is when the threat actor is positioned in between 2 legit entities or 2 legit enterprises that are sharing some sensitive information in order to read or modify the data that passes between the 2 parties. So these are what we call the access attacks and the 4 types. And then denial of service, which is the DOS attack, the most published form of attack and among the most difficult to eliminate. However, because of their ease of implementation and potentially significant damage, the DOS attacks deserve special attention from security administrators. How? 1, the DOS attacks take many forms. Ultimately, they prevent unauthorized people from using the service by using system resources. They help prevent those attacks. It is important to stay up to date. That's for you to help to prevent this. You have to stay up to date with the latest security update for operating systems and applications. And that is why if you're using whichever service you're using, you have to update regularly to get the right signature. So those attacks are a major risk because they interrupt communication and cause significant loss of time and money. These attacks are relatively simple to conduct, even by unskilled threat actors. So you don't really need to be skillful. You could just flood unnecessary packet to that network just to make them lose time not to be able to gain access. I remember the first day we had our first section, we did talk about the DOS. So we could also realize that somebody can be paid just to bring down a competitor, maybe two companies that are doing the same business, probably online. So somebody can pay somebody and say, please bring that guy down. And then he'll just flood this packet maybe for an entire week. You know, there might not be businesses. So you could lose that time and then you could lose the money. And of course, if you want to do that, you don't need to be skilled. If you go online, there are different packets that you can actually use. There are malicious applications that you can use to actually carry out such attack. It does, but sometimes, in fact, I've seen where some cybersecurity students just on their own try to practice this, make a mess of some network. So when you're teaching this, you have to be careful because some of them will go behind you to test it to see if it is working or not. So DDoS is similar to DOS attack, but it originates from multiple coordinated sources. For example, a threat actor views a network of infected hosts known as zombies, and then a network of zombies is called a botnet. So the threat actor uses a command and control program to instruct the bot of zombies to carry out a DOS attack against another against a network, a different network altogether. So there's a lab. You will complete the following in the lab. You explore the SANS website. You identify recent network security threats. You did detail a specific network security threat. So I advise that we work on this lab. And so probably if I could add this to the assignment, you do this lab and send a transcript of it to me. I also have the instructor side, which I will make available at the end of this course. So Sir Julius, kindly remember me so that I can also get us the instructor lab manual for all of this, so that when you do it, I can send it back to Ross.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. So
is it going to be after we have submitted the lab or before we do the lab?
No, when you submit the lab, then I'll send you the instructor.
Okay. So that maybe it's going to serve as a cheat sheet.
Exactly. The instructor. Sir Julius, you really know how to. Yeah, but then of course it's going to.
When you submit the lab, you are assigned an instructor.
You said?
You say what? Say what, Samuel?
I was hearing something like when you submit the lab, you are assigned an instructor. I don't understand.
No, I only said that if he said he's going to give us the lab, the manual. So and I said, is it after we submit or before we submit? I said, okay, if he's giving us before we submit this lab, that means that the other one is going to serve a cheat sheet for us.
Okay.
So, so we should lay our hands on it first.
All right, sir.
So you're saying I should send it first. So
lay our hands on it first. We should try it first.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so the network attack mitigation. So
Mr. Julius.
Yes.
Mr. Julius.
Yes.
Our lecturer understand what would be easy for us, in fact, easier for us. So just be mindful. So we won't arrest you and kidnap you. Let our lecturer give us that we need.
You want him to give you the cheat sheet. Okay.
Okay.
Carry on, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so still on network attack mitigation, the defense in-depth approach. Another defense is to mitigate network attack. You must first secure the device, including your routers, switches, servers. So you could see here that we are looking at network security. I mean, this now tells you the broader, how broad it is when you're looking at it from this angle. You can see here, we're mentioning a lot of hardwares, talking about routers, talking about switches. I mean, cut across, it's quite huge, you know, to be able to play around all these devices. And that is why before anybody dive into security, in Cisco, it's somehow a little bit compulsory that you should do the CCNA1 first. Or you finish the whole of the CCNA track, or you do an introduction to CCNA, or the introduction to network, or what they call, introduction to network before you dive into security, so that you have this baseline knowledge on routers and switches, so that when you begin to look at how to secure them, you can be able to carry out play certain roles, and I mean, up your understanding in the overall network security. So this requires a combination of networking devices and services working in tandem. Several security devices and services are implemented to protect an organization users and assets against TCP/IP threat. One is the VPN, is a firewall. I don't know how many of us have actually used a Cisco firewall before. Nobody?
Not really.
Okay, and then the IPS, ESA, WSA, and the AA server. I mean, the Cisco firewall, of course, what it does is just for you to be able to monitor inbound and outbound traffic. So you can actually select certain IP addresses that you want to bound to certain VLANs, and then restrict certain level of access. And of course, the good thing about it is it will help you filter this traffic in and out the network. That you can actually put in between the DMZ and your LAN router. I mean, that's the best position you can put that, or some network engineers can put it directly from the ISP side. And so, you know, in all these things, you must keep your backup active. So the table shows backup considerations and their description. So you must actually make sure backup is key in everything you're doing, because once there's a compromise, the next thing is that you have to fall back to your backup. So on network mitigations, looking at upgrade, update, and patch, because at this level, you're looking at mitigation. So what do you do to mitigate these eventualities, or mitigate against this attack or vulnerabilities once a threat actor launch an attack? You have to look at upgrade, update, and patch. So most of this, you do them as a way of preventing this whole thing, because if you don't upgrade or update, you might be using obsolete operating systems, and then vulnerabilities might be created, because all this update helps to beef the security of your servers. So when you have an enterprise service that runs several applications, you must always look forward to do this upgrade and update. So as new malware is released, enterprises need to keep current with the latest version of the antivirus software. So authentication, authorization, and accounting is actually a network security service provide a primary framework to set up access control on your devices. So the A is a way to control who is permitted to access the network, via authenticate, and what action the person perform, what they perform, and while accessing the network, and making a record of what was done while they are there. That's the accounting. And then the concept of the A is similar to the use of your credit card. Credit card identifies who can use it, how much that user can spend, and keeps account of what items the user spent on it. So you can actually use this to attribute the authentication authorized, because once you see who can authenticate, who it's been authorized, and then the account is who now would be able to who can be able to access what and what. That is the account. That means what level of access do you have? So for firewalls, the network firewalls reside between two monitors, control traffic between them, and help prevent unauthorized access. And like I said earlier, if you still recall, I did say this, that the firewall could allow outside user controlled access to specified services. For example, servers accessible to outside users are usually located on a special network referred to as a demilitarized zone. So this demilitarized zone you keep here is a normal switch, a normal Cisco switch that can be configured as a DMZ. The reason is because you just want it to be the first point of connection before your router. So there are no specified DMZ equipment in the market. So you can't just say, oh, I need a DMZ. It's not possible. Your Cisco 29 Cisco switch can form your DMZ network for you. So types of firewall, we have different types. We have the packet filtering, which prevents or allows access based on IP or MAC address. We have the application filtering, which prevent or allow access by specific application types based on port numbers. And then we have the URL filtering. So that means you can buy a particular firewall that can help you handle each of this. So for a stateful packet inspection, incoming packet must be legitimate responses to requests from an internal host. So unsuccessful packets are blocked unless permitted and specifically. So SPI can also include the capability to recognize and filter out specific types of attacks. So what we're saying here is that there are different firewalls that can help you do different things. All you just need to do is first tell which particular firewall you're looking at. So endpoint security. An endpoint or host is an individual computer system or device that acts as a network client. So common endpoint are laptops, desktop servers, smartphones. These are like end devices, okay? Securing endpoint devices is one of the most challenging jobs of a network administrator because it involves human nature. So a company must have well-documented policies in place, and employees must be aware of these rules. So it's, of course, difficult because these are actually devices in the hands of the employees. So employees need to be trained on proper use of the network policies, and often include the use of antivirus software and host intrusion prevention. So more comprehensive endpoint security solutions rely on network access control. So while you're doing this, you need to also educate the users so that they will know the kind of policies you have on your network. So device security, the Cisco Auto Secure, the security settings are set to the default values when a new operating system is installed on the device. So in most cases, this level of security is inadequate. For Cisco routers, the Cisco Auto Secure features can be used to assist securing the system. In addition, there are some simple steps that should be taken that apply for most operating systems. One, the default names and passwords should be changed immediately. You don't work with it. Access to system resources should be restricted to only the individuals that are authorized to use those resources. So any unnecessary services and applications should be turned off and uninstalled when possible. So often devices shipped from the manufacturer have been sitting in the warehouse for a period of time and do not have the most up-to-date patches, which you agree with me, installed. So it's important that you have to update any software and install any security patches prior to implementation. So if all these are done, is a way of trying to change whatever default settings you have, and then the operating system you have of this routers or switches, you do some upgrade and update. This is a way of trying to help beef the security of the network, of the device itself. So password, to protect network devices, it's important to use strong passwords. That we know. Here are standard guidelines to follow. So for you use the password length at least 8 characters. This, most sites or most platforms these days, where you have to force the users to get used to actually using strong security characters. So you can see some will tell you minimum of 8, uppercase, lowercase, and all of that. All is a way of trying to increase the strength of the password. And then avoid password based on reputation, common dictionary word. Some people use the same password for all their emails and everything they do. So the moment you know one of the passwords, that's not good in this era. Deliberately misspelled password, for example, Smith is this. Also, it's another way. So somebody would think if your name is David, you can choose to spell David a different way. So if somebody is trying to say, oh, let me see if he uses his name as his password. So, that would be different thing altogether. So you could just make 1 or 2 changes for the password. So additional password security. So there are several steps that can be taken to help ensure that password remains secret on a Cisco router and switching, including this. Encrypt all plain text password with secret password encryption. That you can do, and then set a minimum acceptable password length, security password. So you can actually set a length and give it a time that it will time out, and determine brute force password guessing attack with a login block attempt, and then disable the inactive privilege exec mode access after a specific amount of time. That is where you use this exact timeout. Like this one you're seeing here is saying it's in 5 to 5:30. That's timeout after 5 minutes and 30 seconds. So these are more or less security, additional security measures, because the truth is that if you keep using default security settings, these hackers are already aware of it. So you keep adding and beefing the security. So, and that's why you cannot guarantee anybody 100% security. But the only thing that you can be rest assured, even in this life that we live, I don't think anybody can tell me that I have 100% security. So it's quite complicated, and it's going to be one issue all through humankind, So, but then one of the best way to build security is that you keep, making it complicated for the attacker. So it is possible to configure a Cisco device to support SSH using the following steps. Configure a unique device host name, configure the IP domain name, generate a key, encrypt SSH traffic, and all of that. So I think when we do, in the next configuration we'll add as many security commands as possible to make it quite complicated, so that most of these commands, we'll use them and make it handy. So in every topology you define, you can actually do a lot. So disable unused services. So you can actually disable unused services. Cisco routers and switches start with a list of active services that may or not be required in your network. So disable any unused service to preserve system resources, such as CPU cycles. Even sometimes some people just configure different networks on the router without actually removing them or disabling them. What you're saying is that those things take a lot of resources. Even when you power on the router, it add more load on the CPU cycles and the RAM, and then prevent threat actors from exploiting. So what we're saying is that if those unused services are there, you disabling them will help the threat actors not to take advantage of those services because they're not using them. So the best way out is for you to disable them. So it's a packet tracer to configure secure password and SSH. I want you to play around with that. And then You take your quizzes and let's see how it goes. So these are just this introduction to network security, just to give you some kind of guide. So I will advise that you do the lab, and I promise I'm going to send us the instruction lab to give you a guide so that once you do it, you can also see the step-by-step guide as a solution to help you. So as instructor, what usually help you as an instructor is that while before the student goes to do this lab, you take the instructor or the student lab manual, see what they're supposed to do. You will have actually practiced those labs and make your corrections through this instructor lab manual. And then you give them to go do. And then when they come back to you, you give them the solution to do it themselves. And then they come back before you now give them more more labs to be able to do on their own. I mean, while they are doing that, they get to learn better. Then module 17 has to do with build a small network. I think this will help us build our last project, project for the CCNA course. So the objectives identify the device using a small network, the protocols and application used in a small network, how a small network serves as the basis of large networks, use the output of the ping and trace route command to verify connectivity, use host and the iOS command to acquire information about the devices in the network, and then describe common network troubleshooting methodologies, and then troubleshooting issues with devices in the network. So there are scenarios that.
I'm not seeing your slide again.
Oh, you're not seeing my slide?
The PowerPoint here.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. We're actually on module 17, and we're looking at build a small network. Let me go back again. And I said, these are.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I said, these are the objectives. And this objective is we're going to identify devices used in a small network. Because of course, for you to build a larger network or build more complicated topologies, you must start small. So, so small network topologies. Of course, we know what topologies are. I hope we know what topologies are. And we have two types of topologies. So what are topologies, please? Okay, what are the two types of topologies we have? Is there anybody that can tell us before we go further? Hello?
Physical and the logical. Physical topology, logical topology.
You say?
Logical.
Physical and logical.
So how do we differentiate between the two? How do we differentiate between the two?
The physical is the actual connection between the devices with the cables and other to the interfaces and just media connection to the interfaces.
Okay.
While the logical is the actual network with data flowing through the, I don't know, with the IP addresses.
Just like configuration.
Yes, that's already been configured.
Okay.
With the various addressing.
The physical has to do with cabling, or physical connection between two or more devices in a physical form using media, while the logical has to do with possibly the configuration of the connections.
Okay. So once it is configured and then it's sharing resources, that is
That is logical.
That is logical. So the small network topologies now, the majority of the businesses are small. Most of the businesses network are also small. So a small network design is usually simple. Small networks typically have a single WAN connection provided by DSL cable or Ethernet connection. So large networks require an IT department to maintain, secure, troubleshoot network devices, and to protect organization data. So small networks are managed by a local IT technician or by contracted professional. So device for selection for a small network. So the factors that must be considered when selecting network devices include cost, speed and types of port interfaces, expandability. I think this expandability can also be like scalability. And then operating system features and services. So you agree with the area of cost is that what kind of router do we buy? Do we buy a core router switch, so they are 3 router switch, which is going up about 30 million, 45 million, 60 million? Or would you just go for a simple Cisco router? And while you're doing that, you're also looking at your kind of topology and how many people are on that network. Then you look at the speed and types of the ports. In other words, the types of switches that will be used for distribution. So you look at, in some cases, some people don't use plug and play switches. You know, those plug and play switches does not require some configuration. But the point here is that how many people do you have on the network, and also looking at how to expand or the scalability, and then operating system features and services. All that are factors to look into. And then IP addressing for a small network. Of course, when you're designing an IP address for a small network, you wouldn't want to use a very high, maybe for instance, a class A IP network. You must use something that you think can actually be useful and you can actually utilize. And that is where like the variable subnet that we talked about also comes in here. You look at what you think is needed. So IP addressing for a small network. So when you implement a network, create an IP addressing scheme and use it. All hosts and devices within an network must have a unique address. So devices that will factor into the IP addressing scheme include the following: the end devices, the number and type of connection, either wired or wireless, remote access. But in the topology we're going to build, we're going to make sure we use all of that. I think it will help us. So redundancy is a small network. In order to maintain a high degree of reliability, redundancy is actually required. Reason that, so that when there's an event of a failure of one server, the other can serve as the backup. And then traffic management. So the goal of a good network design is to enhance the productivity of the employees and minimize network downtime, which is actually very key. And then common applications. After you have set up your network and still need certain types of application and protocol in that to work, the network is only as useful as the application that are on it. So there are two forms of software programs or processes provided access to network: the network applications and the application layer services. Please always note that down. And then the common protocols. These are the common protocols. I think we've mentioned all these protocols. It's high time you also review them again. They are needed on the network. And then these network protocols comprise the fundamentals of two sets of network professionals. Processes on either end of the communication section, the types of messages, syntax of the messages, meaning of the information field, how messages are sent, and the expected response. Interaction with the next lower layer. So you have to make sure that your protocols are able to maintain these tool sets at every point in time. So even you as a professional must be careful whenever you're carrying out this. And so many companies have established a policy of using secure version, e.g. SSH, SFTP, HTTPS, or whenever possible. So there's a voice and video application. Businesses today are increasingly using IP telephony and streaming media to communicate with customers and business partners, as well as enabling their employees to work remotely. Network administrator must ensure the proper equipment is installed in the network and the network devices are configured to ensure priority delivery. So all these are steps that you as a network administrator must do to ensure that you have a special, a small network design. So if you must set up your design, you have to look all. Hello. Hello. Hello, can we hear me? Hello.
Yes,
We are hearing you.
yes, sir.
Okay.
We are hearing you.
Okay, I was hearing noise from the background. Okay, so scale to larger network. Okay, so small network growth. So small network should be given the opportunity to also grow. So growth is a natural process for many small businesses, and the networks must grow accordingly. So ideally, the network administrator has enough lead time to make intelligent decisions about growing the network in alignment with the growth of the company. So to scale a network, several elements are required. Network documentation. So you have to look at the physical and logical topology, device inventory, to look at the budget, and then the traffic analysis. So for small network to grow effectively, you must look at the physical and the logical topology. That's for you to scale it up. And then you have to look at the inventory. There's a list of designs that you use or compromise the network. So you must follow this procedure. That will help you to be able to grow the network. So protocol analysis. It's important to understand that the type of traffic that is crossing the network as well as the current traffic flow. There are several network management tools that can be used for this purpose. So determining the traffic flow patterns is important for you to do the following. Capture traffic using during peak utilization time to get a good representation of the different traffic types. So at peak hour, you can even use Wireshark to do that, so to capture that. Perform the capture on different network segments and devices, small net traffic, all is just to be able to manage your traffic and see how best to improve that. Employee network utilization. Many operating systems provide built-in tools to display such network utilization information. These tools can be used to capture a snapshot of information such as the following: OS and OS version, as type of OS is used, CPU utilization. Of course, if you use Task Manager, you can check that. RAM utilization, drive utilization, non-network applications, network applications. So documenting snapshots for employees in a small network over a period of time is very useful to identify evolving protocol requirement and associate traffic flows. You're doing all this because, of course, this network is small, but you want to scale it to large networks. So if you must scale it, you must now begin to look at the utilization to see if what you have designed initially is being probably optimized. So if it's been optimized to a certain level, and now you begin to exhaust the available resources, there's a need now you begin to see, how do I scale? So before you scale, you must make sure you have some apparatus or metrics on ground to be able to checkmate your existing network topology before you start adding. So you don't just scale, but rather you should have justification for scaling that network by using those various tools mentioned. So once you check the RAM size, you check the CPU utilization, you'll be able to tell if you actually upping it, the usage to maybe 90 or 99%, and then there's a need for you now to do upgrade. So verify connectivity. So you have to verify connectivity by using ping. So we'll be using the ping already. So I think we don't have issue with that, with pinging. So you can also do extend pinging as well, and to test connectivity. So you could do trace route. We mentioned that already. Verify connectivity with trace route, extended trace route. So This we can do with our labs. Then IP configuration on Windows. If you want to check your IP configuration on Windows, I remember in the first class I did told us this. You can do ipconfig/all. If you do if you do ipconfig, you see it. But if you want to see more detailed information, use /all. And then, for instance, if you and some of you maybe if a system does not connect, you go to the network icon, you deactivate, and then you reconnect. Instead of doing that, just type ipconfig/release and ipconfig/renew. Immediately you do release, it will begin to reset the connection. And then when you say renew, it will connect. I mean, it's a very fast way of trying to reset your network connection. So I advise that you use this command regularly instead of going to look for where you have your network and then begin to do that manually. So this comes and makes it faster for you. And the DNS client service on Windows PC also optimizes the performance of the DNS name resolution by storing previously resolved names in memory. So the ipconfig display DNS command display all the catch DNS entries on Windows. So once Windows actually helps to capture some of this domain, it will be on the browser, it will be on the Windows. So the next time you're trying to connect to such site, it opens. And this actually, most of them you can see it in your cache memory. It's available. So what we're saying is that when you type ipconfig/display DNS, it will show you all those DNS entries. So please, you could try that on your system and see. And then ipconfig on a Linux host. You can use this command ipconfig on Linux to be able to configure IP on the Linux system. And then ipconfig on Mac, you can use as under the network preference and advanced, you can go and use iconfig. Okay, and then the app command still on the Linux. You can use app. Okay, this is for on your system, your host, which is your host device. You can actually test to see the app by using the app-a and then see what you have already stored in your host. Of course, this has to do with your operating system, but it's stored in your CAD server. So I'm going to advise that we carry out all these tests and actually confirm with the description here, and so that we can see the workability of this command. The show CDP label actually is used to test, to be able to check for device identifiers, address list, port identifier, capabilities list. CDP will provide information about each CDP-enabled device. If you have two or more systems routers connected together, what we're saying is that if you must identify the content in each of those neighboring routers, this command show CDP enables goes a long way. You just issue on the router show CDP enable, and it provides more detailed information about the directly connected devices or routers or hops, what we call hop. Each router that is connected to another router on the network are also referred to as hops. Please, not hop, but hops, H-O-P-S. So you can be on one router and be able to check the information on the subsequent routers. So you can also use the show IP interface brief to be able to give you more information. So this is actually a command that you can use. So troubleshooting methodologies. How do you troubleshoot? Before you troubleshoot, you must make sure the system is working, or the system was working at one time, it goes off, or in the course of doing it, you key in the wrong command, and now you want to undo what you have done and then continue from there. So the troubleshooting approach will go along with the first thing is identify the problem. What's the problem before you troubleshoot? So troubleshooting is like solving problems or challenges. Establish a theory of probable cause, test the theory to determine, and then establish a plan of action and implement the solution. then verify solution, and then implement it, and then document your findings. This is a step-by-step guide that must be used to be able to carry out your troubleshooting. So you can actually debunk command. So all debunk commands are entries in the previous exec mode. So the Cisco IRS allow for narrowing the output of the debunk to include only the relevant feature or sub-features. So use debunk command only to troubleshoot specific problem. So maybe we could, in some cases, we could just have a network and then begin to use this command. So the debug command is actually to help you. It's a command you issue on the router or on the switch to be able to give you some processes or some issues that you now need to help to rectify. So once you enable it on and you issue that command, it will display for you and then give you some, let you know if there are issues on that configurations, and then in some cases point them out. So the debunk and contain other iOS message output is not automatically displayed to remote connections. This is because log messages are prevented from being displayed on PTY line. So it will display those log messages to let you know the issues. Troubleshooting scenarios, so duplex operation and mismatch issues. Interconnecting Ethernet interfaces must operate in the same duplex mode for best communication performance and to avoid inefficiency and latency on the link. So what we're saying is that everything must be configured in phase, and or else you have some issues. But when there are issues, what do? For instance, if those issues are attributed to wrong IP addresses assigned to interfaces that is making it not to be on the same phase, you can use show IP interface brief to be able to see those IP addresses and remove the wrong IP addresses so that you not have some kind of mismatch, okay, or probably put in the wrong usable IP address. IP addressing issues on end devices. If a DHCP, for instance, is not active, remember your system will pick numbers arbitrarily under what we call automatic private IP address, which is 169.254.0.0. So you have a system picking this IP address because your DHCP server is not working or cannot connect to the DHCP server. So what we're saying is that what do? You can use ipconfig release and ipconfig renew to test to see if your DHCP server at that point in time is active or not. Please, I want you to note that down. So default gateway issues. Default gateway for, of course, we know what a default gateway is. We're saying is a router interface which all the systems that are connected on the LAN has to go through. So the default gateway for an end device is the closest network device belonging to all the same network on this device. We've said that before. So similar to IPv4 addressing issues, default gateway problems can be related to misconfiguration. Oftentimes it's misconfiguration, putting the wrong IP address. So you can actually show IP interface to see that, or you should show IP route, or you can also use IP config. But then specifically, you can do show IP interface brief to review to you. And then for the DNS, you can use a DNS lookup to look at the DNS IP address if it's correct or not. And then lab troubleshooting issues. So you can use a packet tracer connectivity issues to check all of that. But the truth is that first, you must have a clear understanding of what you're configuring or what you have configured, and then see that if it's not working, and then you can then be able to go through. So at this level, I think we should just see troubleshooting as part of the integrated solution to solve some network issues. But then it is more important that when you now have perfected your configuration skill, you now begin to look at a better way to troubleshoot this. Because if at this level you're still struggling with configuration, I think troubleshooting will be more difficult. Troubleshooting will come handy when you have mastered the act of configuring your network. So this actually brings us to the end of the entire course, which is from module 1 to 17. I quite appreciate your patience to work with me through this whole modules. What I will say is that read through the materials, do your module quizzes or module assessment, and then do those labs that I've given us so far. So Julius, I want you to specify any of the 2 days in next week that I can just do a hands-on before your final exam. I think it will be important. So maybe if it's Monday or Wednesday, fine. I can come.
Okay.
And then help
I
us.
think we are all hearing. So which day should he come up?
So you can choose 1 day or 2. I could just come and do labs.
I think
labs with us.
I'll first of all, after much appreciation, I will first of all suggest that we should take this time now to dig. So this is weekend and the other days before he comes up. So I want us to suggest maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, which of the days do we want him to come up so that we would have gone through all the commands so that anything he's doing, we are familiar with it already.
Yeah, and then if you have questions to ask me, you can ask me.
I expected us to have gone through all the materials even before he does anything for us. Okay. So that it will just be a walkover.
Exactly.
Yes. So please, let's talk. The floor is for every one of us.
Okay, Dr. Moses, are you there? Mohammed, Uthman, Sada, I hope you're catching up, Sada. I think Sada has been
Sada has been up and on.
Yes, but at least
Sada, this is an opportunity for us to decide together to make sure every one of us is carried along.
So I'm here.
Dalatu, what's your take on this?
I was trying to unmute myself, unfortunately. Sorry.
Dalatu there? Okay. She's not.
Sorry, apologies.
Okay. So, Sada, did you hear the suggestion?
No, sorry, I missed it. Apologies.
Okay, the suggestion is that now we are done, but he wants to take us through some practical for 1 or 2 days. Which of the days are we looking at? And we are suggesting that it should be the time that this weekend we should go through all the materials on 1 or 2 more days before ever he will come, so that when he's coming up, it will be like a walkover for all of us who would have understood and gone through all the topics. So he's asking us to choose a day. And along the line.
Mr. Julius.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry cutting you short, sir. You say we should practice. There will be time we need to do interactions. We will not see each other when we fix a meeting.
Well, we discussed that with Dr. Baru before the meeting this night, how we are going to organize, whether online, to all of us, we will meet again and discuss for like 2 days, interact, configure, go through Dr. Baru has gone through a lot of manual. He found so many of them challenging and interesting, and he will share his wealth of experience with us. So we need this time.
Will you be available?
I will. I'll make myself available.
Okay, sir. We'll look onto that.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
So we need to release our lecturer. We need to now decide. We need to give him time. Should he come in on Tuesday or Wednesday? Should we make it Wednesday for him?
And
hello?
If you know you guys can handle, you can on your own, maybe work together and resolve all.
I will also suggest that, sir, you push them to us to work it. Then we will see where we are lacking.
Yeah, okay, maybe what we will do is this. This is what let me just give us this, the project, maybe in the course of your, coming together to solve some of these challenges, you might decide to do the project yourself and solve that. So I think it will go a long way. But then I've been checking the grade book, and so many people actually have been lagging behind. And what I have come up with as a way of trying to make this quite friendly for us is that if you have written more than half the module assessment, I will give you the opportunity to write the final exam. So when is the final exam? What have we decided? So because, hello, are we there?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are all there.
No,
We are here, sir.
no.
We need to talk this night so that I can plan.
Yes.
Sir, the final exam,
Look,
is it
what I see
is it
here.
going to cover everything? Because you just mentioned if you've done the more than half, that means doing 3 or 4 of the exams. Will that be enough for the final exam?
You said if that will be enough for the final exam?
Yes, sir.
No, all I'm saying is that if I'm giving you the final exam to write, maybe Thursday next week, for instance, and for those of you who are in the I'm just saying, for instance, means that the time is short. What we're looking at that point in time is that you can write the final exam and then you now have time to do the other module assessment. Because I'm looking at it this way, that some people might have difficulty in finishing all the module exams before writing the final exam. So some people might want to read all the modules and prepare to write the final exam. In fact, in some cases, we have what we call the fast track training. In fact, there are 1 or 2 of you that based on your submissions and all of that, I've seen that you've been so quiet and silent in this class, but you're that good that you can even do fast track training and say, come, just test me on my final exam and let me be my 6th instructor. We do that as well. But it doesn't come often. But what I'm trying to say in addition to that is that I'm saying that if you have written the module exams up to 5 attempts, in other words, in that order, I'm saying that automatically I will allow you to write your final exam, irrespective of the fact that you have not finished all the entire module assessment. But after your final exam, you can still go back and make up for those module assessment. Then before I will now pass you and then accredit you proper to be able to teach those courses and be an instructor. So if that is fine by us, that's okay. We could work with that. Maybe like 4, done like 4 or 5. It's okay. You mustn't finish all of them, but at least you've attempted a number of assessments. But you should, of course, you know too well that when you write the final exam, you will have read through the material because of the labs that are involved.
This is my
I don't know if you guys are actually hearing me and understand what I'm saying.
We are hearing you.
Okay.
This is my suggestion, sir.
Okay, sir.
Because when I was discussing with Julius, I was suggesting you give us this week to go through the whole materials on our own.
Okay.
There are labs. And when I was going through those labs, they are very illuminating. Many things become clearer when you actually do these hands-on labs.
Lovely.
So by the other week, therefore, we can think of fixing the exam you are talking about. That's why, earlier I suggested that the exam should be like 28, so that everybody will have gone through those tests and gone through the labs and gotten familiar very well with the materials.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm listening. Very well.
You were initially you were suggesting third or fourth, but we said that
Yeah.
will be
Too long.
yes. So we need to bring it closer.
Yes.
So where are we now?
My question is that
28.
on the, I can see that there is practice exams. That's after module 17. After module 17, 16, 17 exam. You have practice exam, practice PT skills, practice. Then there's also final exams, ITM final exams, PTSA, IT final exams equipment. Then the course feedback, and then final exam. So is it this last one that says restricted, that when you said it's possible to write it after taking 5 of the module exams?
If you look at, there are a lot of final exams you look at there.
Yes.
You have your module assessments are there already, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And the final, you have one final exam that is actually unique and overall,
Okay.
which is what we are going to use.
All right.
So what I'm saying is that if once you read all the modules, of course, any of the final exam that is activated for you, you can be able to attend them. But then I'll activate the practice finals for us, so that those of you who want to attend practice before the final exam can do that. The practice final does not count, so it's just for you to practice and see what the final exam will look like. So it's good that you have something to practice with, and then test your ability first before you write the final exam. And if it's okay by us, I'll activate it. And if you think it's not necessary,
It's good.
okay.
If this are activating for us, sir.
Okay, sure. So I will activate it immediately. So for those of you who want to practice with it, so that before the agreed date, you'll have done a lot of practicing.
Yeah.
So on the group chat, you can let me know when you want me to reactivate the practice. Maybe you've done it before, you want to redo it again. Just let me, or you can private chat me. I can always do that for you. Are we following?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sir.
okay.
Okay. Okay. So we said we're going to write on the 28th or 29th.
Oh, 28, 29. Oh,
Yes, the weekend will be that on a weekend, maybe 28, 29.
yes, actually, I'm looking at
Right, yes.
travel by 28. I have a schedule that I may have to be on the road on 28, sir. And it's very important. It has to do with my family issue. Please. I don't know.
Okay, so you are okay with 28?
No, I'm looking at 29, maybe 28. I may not be in town. I may be on the road traveling.
Okay. Okay,
I
then
don't
you
know
can then you can do your lab on 27 then.
Okay, sir. I'll be working
We
towards
can
that.
agree to do lab on 27, write the final exam 29.
Okay, sir.
Or we do, I mean, I'm just saying this to the house, please, to the general house. Then, or what have we agreed on, Dr. Moses, finally? Then let me see how we can factor him out.
So sir, the lab is using equipment or the same or
The lab
packet tracer?
doing the configuration.
Okay, is it the packet tracer?
Yeah.
Still? Oh, okay. All right. Okay, that's model 17, the end of model 17.
All.
No, there'll be a packet tracer.
Going to cover all.
Okay.
So the other folks that have not been active, we need to bring them back and let them write. The truth is that Sir Julius, let them not be discouraged because